And welcome to Lone Star Yell Fight, where your favorite Aggie, Andy Tom Chesson, and your favorite Longhorn, James Christopher, take you deep inside the two flagship programs of Texas football. And welcome back to Lone Star Yell Fight, or in my case, we might as well call this thing Lone Star Yell Cry. I'm your host, James Christopher, the resident Longhorn, and we've got our favorite Aggie, Andy Tom Chesson, here. Andy, we haven't had the show because of reasons in a really a good amount of time. A lot has happened. Let's start by unpacking Aggie activity on the transfer portal, all of that fun stuff.
Well, before we get there, I would like to remind you and all your fellow Longhorn fans, the transitive property does not exist in college football. So
I know.
while you might feel a little bit sad this morning and certainly angry last night, there's nothing to be hanging your heads about with, I guess, finishing in the AP top three.
Yeah, and I know we'll get to it. And you're in people. He's referring to a very grumpy message. I've been very zen about the whole thing until sometime around 10:30 last night. At that point, I was like, you know what, I can't handle this. But does look like A&M has kept the recruiting class, at least through the transfer portal. Lost some guys, getting some guys. How you feeling?
Well, this is what you have to do when you fire your coach in this new world order. And despite some of my arguments with your fellow Texas fans, if Sarkisian ever goes anywhere on the heels of a down season, you're going to experience the same pain because players are going to leave.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to fill spots. There's to give context, Mike Elko took the job. We have since Mike Elko came aboard, recruited or signed 21 players from the transfer portal, in addition to, I think, 14 players from the recruiting class that he was mostly able to keep together. There's still one or two out there to be determined on that. And there's been a lot of, there's filling up with bread. These are all scab players. Nobody else wanted them. The reality is they signed 21 players. Two of those are walk-ons who fill needs. I think one is a kicker. The other one is a wide receiver. But 11 of these guys, 11 or 12 of these guys are from Power 5 schools. So it's not like it's exclusively a group of five kids. And the group of five kids that we did sign are all like fifth-year seniors. So these are all guys who have played a lot of games, have a lot of experience, and have proven things on the field. I'm not saying everybody out of these 21 guys are going to be starters, and they shouldn't be, but they're going to provide depth for a team that desperately needs depth. When you watch the bowl game that I had to watch through like this, that's why you need to subscribe to the video portion of this show, folks. You don't know what I just did.
Yeah, 35 scholarship players, right?
Yeah,
It's
some ridiculously low number. Probably a little bit better than that, but and when you are challenged with depth, playing a pretty much depleted Oklahoma State team, and you end up losing by a reasonable amount, it just proves you've got to have players. You've got to have bodies at some point. The class that we just signed is highlighted by Kansas State cornerback Will Lee, who is, I think, a 4-star ranked in the portal. I don't know what the portal rankings mean, because it seems to be some weird mix of high school ranking that 247 might have given them in the composites and what they did in college, but not all the time, because like somebody like Evan Stewart, who's leaving A&M, potentially, he still hasn't signed anywhere, was a 5-star coming out of high school and has played well, but I don't know that he's still a 5-star coming out for wherever his next home is. Maybe he will be, but I don't know exactly how their rankings work, other than they're nebulous and made up and like all things ranking related. The other big get, I think, for us is Nick Skewerton, who is the sacks leader in the Big Ten this year, coming out of Purdue. He is a native of Bryan, is coming home to play in front of his family, and evidently had always dreamed about playing for A&M. And when he asked why he signed this time, he said it's because Mike Elko didn't sugarcoat it. He said he missed on the evaluation 4 years ago, and should have signed him then. So he liked that Elko was straight with him. And I think the emotional one for a lot of football fans in Texas, especially north of Austin, and at least half of the host of this show, E.J. Smith, who is the son of Cowboys legend Emmitt Smith, will be coming to as a graduate transfer after completing his degree on January 11th with Stanford. So he'll play 1 year and provided he's going to provide some necessary third down back type depth, as well as the ability to pass block, which is an area our running backs have not been good in the last
Yeah.
couple of years. So I think you'll see a fair amount of him, but I think it's a good mix of players. I think it's where they need to be. I don't think we're necessarily done. I know we're in a transfer portal dead period until Friday, which again, the rules around this is so bizarre.
So weird.
You get to open up things as soon as your coach is fired, and then everybody's open on December 2nd, and then it's closed on January 2nd. But as long as you're in the portal by January 2nd, you can still sign. And then there's a dead period, evidently from the 8th until the 12th. And then you've got another weekend.
Yeah.
Uh,
It doesn't make any sense to me.
but I expect that we'll add a few more, probably wide receivers and linebackers seem to be what we still have a need for. So
Before we get into the main topic, though, what a
was that
story.
more than you wanted?
No, not at all. But what a story Emmett Smith, his life has been. And I ended up watching his football life. And, he came from nothing, extreme poverty in Florida. And now his son graduated from Stanford. Like, just that is just, I don't know. It's a beautiful story.
Well,
And
his daughter was a scholarship soccer player at A&M as well, so the family is familiar.
yeah,
Evidently, it was between Stanford and A&M. And as big a fan as I am of A&M, if you have the chance to get a Stanford degree for free, you take
yes.
the Stanford degree every time.
Every time, every time, every time. Um, all right, let's dive into the Longhorns. To me, it looked like a team that played tight, at least at the beginning. That I think maybe the moment was too big for them. I think that's how you explain all of the false starts and all of the just procedural penalties they have. Um, I think that they actually did a really good job about playing them, particularly in the second half. But I think that you just got too far behind the power curve. And the one bright side I'll say is that Washington really could have put them away in the first half and didn't. But just overall, what were your thoughts watching Texas go out there?
I think what I was immediately struck by, at least in the first half, was one of the things we discussed as a key to winning the game was that Quinn Ewers was going to have to not be first half Quinn Ewers like we've seen in a few big games this season.
Yeah,
He was pretty spotty, I think, especially in the first quarter and about halfway through. And even with that, y'all were still in the game. Your defense stood up, I thought. Uh, and it comes back to my opinion of Steve Sarkisian being a little bit cute. This is a team in Washington that gave up 300 rushing yards to Michigan, and realizing you guys are different animals than Michigan. But Sark still insisted on throwing the ball 43 times in that game.
yeah,
So it's a little bit, I think that maybe the moment was too big. I think it's more of the University of Texas program being a little bit ahead of schedule and getting to the playoffs a little bit earlier than they were probably ready for, rather than individual players, not performing or that kind of thing. I think it's happenstance. If you play Washington again, I think those were two fairly evenly matched teams, but I think the matchup bit you more than anything Texas did, in that Michael Penix had a hell of a game against you,
yeah.
but
I mean,
you guys were susceptible to the downfield pass all season long,
well,
and that
and we knew that going in when we did our pregame on it that if Texas didn't get home in the pass rush, they were going to get torched, and they got torched. And even still, Penix was completing passes where you cannot cover any better than they were being covered. I mean, it was really an unreal performance, aided by the fact that the pass rush was always like half a step away, and it was just one of those things.
And I think that was the big difference in what you saw last night. I think Michigan is a better defensive team overall than Texas. But I think Michigan was able to put pressure on Penix all night long and disguise their coverages enough that those passes that he made look easy, and the incredible passes, the difficult ones that he completed, just weren't there for him last night against Michigan. I also think that just watching Michigan offensively against Washington versus what Texas did, they ran the ball. I mean, they ran
Yeah.
the ball, and their offensive line was dominant for a good when they needed to be dominant. Now, to Michigan's credit, I think they played better in the second and third period. They just couldn't score points. But they certainly stayed in the game. And up until the last half of the fourth quarter, it was a 7-point game.
Yeah.
And just stuff happens. But I don't think there's any question that Michigan throughout the year was one of the two best teams in college football, and they ended up winning the whole thing. I think, the system worked the way it was supposed to this year,
Yeah,
which I know is we're talking about Texas, but
no, but I do agree, and I think, you know, like I'm not gonna. There, I'm honestly pleasantly surprised by my fan base. I haven't seen a lot of. I've seen a lot of cut yours, but I haven't seen a lot of fire Sarks, and I think that to me was at least a little refreshing. But I do
yeah.
agree. He scored the one touchdown where I think he ran it maybe 6 or 7 times, and all the runs were like 15 yards. And then he immediately scored the touchdown, get the ball back in 3 passes and punt. And I don't get it. I'm an old school watching a football guy, and I'm used to like watching Emmitt Smith run into the line for 2 yards at a time in the first and second quarter. By the third quarter, he's getting the gashing runs, and the passing game is open because you beat them up so long. And it seemed like, I don't know, it just seemed like it was cute. There were reverse passes that didn't need to happen. It was just weird.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult when you are considered an offensive savant to just go with what works, because I think the thought process, I'm guessing, if you're very good at something, well, I want to continue to expand that goodness. I want to be creative. I want to stretch the envelope, all that kind of stuff. And I think Sark gets in his own way with some of that stuff sometimes. Having said that, I don't know that there's a question Sark didn't answer this year. He's been coach 8-4 for a long time, and certainly blew that out of the water. Won a conference championship, which I guess you guys do every time you leave a conference. Is that just a thing?
Yeah, I think we're going to just basically work through all Power Five and Group of Five conferences. We'll be in the SEC for a year. We'll take that one. Then we'll hop down to, I don't know. Does the Mountain West still exist? We'll do that for a while.
I don't know. ACC might take some teams
They
before
might.
they blow all that up.
Yeah. No, but you're right. You need to put a ribbon on them uh, on the season. It's clearly a successful season. I'm not as bullish on sort of just assuming Texas will be back there next year. I think that many a slip takes a cup and a lip, and I'm obviously confident going in. I'm glad that yours is, by all reports, staying, because I do think competency at quarterback is the most important thing you can take into, particularly jumping into a conference like the SEC. So, yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic about next year. I think the talent replacing, like one of the things we were talking about, like, again, about the secondary is Sark like recruited a whole new secondary. Like he even knew that was the weakness. So I'm feeling good about it. And one of the things that's been kind of neat, just because of how feudal Texas football has been since 2009, I feel like this is the most Longhorn players I've seen declare for their draft like in a really long time.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of neat. And I think it does show you kind of where the program is.
Well, and that's a double-edged sword, right? You want to prove to the players that you're trying to recruit that this is a place you can get to the NFL. That's the positive side of it. The downside of it is you guys are losing a lot of experienced players who kind of grew up and won together. And so now it's up to that next wave of players. And it's rough. We ran into something similar, I think, after the 2020 season, where A&M went 9-1 and then lost this group of seniors that had kind of been through the battles, and in 21 took a step back and went 8-4, which evidently was Jimbo's high watermark. Who knew? And it's a trap for coaches. And you guys have enough depth that you haven't had to dip into the transfer portal a lot yet. I think you had like we talked about last time, a great signing class, but only 3 incoming transfers so far, from U of H, from good player Trey Moore out of UTSA, and then a guy from Clemson. But you've had 13 players transfer out, none of which look like giant losses to me.
No, not really. One
Because
was
I'm looking at where they're going, and I know that's not always fair, but like you've got a guy going to UNLV, you've got a guy going to North Texas, you've got two guys going to North Texas, you've got a guy that I actually have to roll over the icon here on the 247 site to see what this is, Coastal Carolina. So it's not exactly like you're losing a lot of, oh my God, how are we going to replace this guy? I think the guy that's probably potentially most impactful that you're losing is Malik Murphy to Duke. And I don't think he has a place on next year's roster. So
yeah, no, I agree. I do think it's one thing for I think Arch Manning has to be your backup next year if you expect to keep him. And I think that's what it felt like. I think Malik saw the writing on the wall. Obviously, best of luck to him. But you're right. I mean, this is what's going to is Texas going to be good in cycles, or are they going to be Alabama and Georgia, where it's a machine that just keeps refilling itself? And that's really what we'll find out. In my lifetime, Texas has not been the Georgia Alabama thing. Like there usually was a fall off after a good year and then ramp back up. It's almost like how we can expect the Astros to now go to the World Series and lose next year because they made it to the ALCS and lost like in 2018. I think I think it remains to be seen. It just feels like a tighter program than what we've seen in a while. And I don't know if it's going to be able to replicate Mac Brown's 10-win seasons all the time, but it also might see bigger wins than Mac Brown saw in that decade or so.
Well, I think one of the interesting things is that you're right. That's the last sustained stretch of great to excellent play that Texas has had, and Mac Brown left a few years ago, decade or so. But in this new world order, in this brave new world that we have starting in 2024, 12 teams make the playoffs. I don't know. And yes, winning a conference championship is going to matter to some extent because school can sell merch. But beyond that,
I
you
want to
just
buy
have
merch. Like
I know, but you just have to be one of the 12 best teams. And so getting to the point where you can consistently have 10 wins, whether you're competing for a conference championship or not with that 12th win, isn't going to matter as much because the 12 best teams have a chance to win the national championship. So I think we're all going to have to redefine what that stretch of excellence looks like. If you took, and what I mean by that is if you took that same Mac Brown run of 10 wins where he only won 2 conference championships, I believe. I think
yeah,
it's 2.
two.
Because,
05 and 09.
because you had the misfortune of Oklahoma also being really, really good at that time. And now both those teams make the playoffs every year. With those kind of records, both those teams make the playoffs. And so you have a chance to win it all, even if you don't win the conference championship. And that's been a slot that's been reserved for LSU and Alabama the last
Well,
10.
and I do think that's one good thing, and we've talked about this before, where one of the advantage of the NFL has over college football is it's not every game isn't all or nothing. One loss doesn't derail a season, as we saw from Georgia. They lost one game. Their season was derailed. So hopefully, I mean, we'll at least see something different when it comes to that expansion of the playoffs. It's one of the, I think, the benefits of it.
Well,
I wanted
I think you're already, I don't mean to cut you off. I think you're already seeing it as well because there's no way that Notre Dame and A&M agree to play each other the first game of the season. If one loss, it's going to kill you.
right.
That's going to be your second or third game because you need the directional school warm-ups before you go play the big show. I think it would be more difficult for Texas to go to Michigan and play that game in game 2 if that's going to make your season.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that's what should have happened to Alabama this year when they lost to you guys. That should have eliminated them from the playoffs. They get the benefit of the doubt of being in the SEC,
Right.
where you guys probably didn't from being in the Big 12, but now that's gone away too because you're both members of the SEC. Welcome. So I just think there's going to be a lot of interesting changes, not short of which is in 326 days, the rivalry is renewed, and we'll have more to talk about there. But I think we're going to have to start a countdown.
Do we?
I mean, I think we have to.
We think we have to.
Well, considering this will be our last show until what, August? Yes, we
Well,
could.
I think we're gonna have a couple more when signing day is over with, but yeah, you're right. Um, well, look, and I think the rivalry game will be fun, and the run up will be fun between the two of us. I think both of us are smart enough to leave the other one alone for a couple of days until after we've soaked in.
Oh, we're not doing a live reaction
No,
show.
I don't think we should. We're not subject to the FCC, but boy, if we were. Hey, but I wanted to talk to you about a couple things because you have talked about what the future looks like, and I've told you before that my brother-in-law Nathan, who's as schooled as we are, has said we're all getting what we want and we're going to regret getting what we want. And Kirby Smart really, I thought, was really poignant in his press conference talking about what have we done to college football that he had what they had 30 scholarship players, and it's not
Mm.
fun for anybody to win 63 to whatever. Um, is there any way to fix that? I mean, there's no way to fix that because
I,
these,
I think the proverbial horse is out of the barn on that. And it's the NCAA's fault. The NCAA was given a number of opportunities to address compensation for players, and they chose not to, dying, literally hoisting themselves on the petard of we're student athletes and it's amateur sports and that's all we're ever going to be. And the problem with that is this is America. And we all believe, no matter really what your political leanings are, that people should earn what they're worth.
yeah,
And so college players have that right now. Where the continued screw up that I don't think they can undo is this unlimited transfer portal that they allowed to happen. And we've both talked about, how that can be fixed, but I don't know that it can be because it becomes a legal case now. So we have this environment where if your team's not the playoffs, it used to just be, and used to be 5 years ago, that your top players might just opt out of a bowl game if it wasn't one of the BCS games or wasn't one of the playoff games. But that was a handful of guys. That wasn't in mass people just electing not to play
yeah,
in a bowl game
it was
and
so few
not
guys that you
declaring.
could complain about the one.
Yeah, not declaring for the NFL, but just I'm not going to play. And I'm going to immediately enter the transfer portal and see what my odds are. And the transfer portal, the reason those two things are so intertwined is because a lot of what's driving players into the transfer portal is not an opportunity for snaps, like I think was intended. It's an opportunity to go shop myself and get myself the best financial deal, which again, we're capitalist. We don't mind that. But those two things combined have really gutted the sport, I think. Um, how do you fix it? I think that proposal that's sitting out there that nobody's talking about anymore, it came out in November, that the NCAA had the top whatever football teams, the ones that want to play the game, separate themselves from the rest of college football and play amongst themselves. And all those players are on the payroll and all those players have a fixed income and that's it. And they have their own set of rules. If you could get to that and you truly, we've talked about this before, whether it's the top 64 or 48 or realistically probably 25 teams, um, that move into that level, that's what's going to fix that part of college football because you're not seeing the same thing from the Division II teams who have a playoff system and where those games matter and you can still be in. I didn't see Sam Houston have a bunch of people. I don't even think Sam Houston was good this year. But probably one of the Dakotas. They usually have a good FCS kind of schedule. But if one of those teams, if they have stuff to play for, those players play. But we've made a sport where there's nothing to play for. So what's the point outside of let's just see what I can earn? Which again, I don't have a problem with,
Right.
but it is too much too soon, and I don't know that the consequences were imagined, at least not well thought out by the NCAA.
It does seem like they came up with all of this stuff and implemented it without doing a lot of thought. I think you're saying as a
The federal,
reaction
the,
to
yeah, I mean the federal government basically said this is what's going to happen now.
yeah, and I mean I'm with you. I don't blame anyone, and for as much as I don't like it, I also don't blame a kid who is NFL draft eligible. We saw Willis McGahee when he was in Miami. I mean,
Mhm.
and there were even people saying he should have sat out. And he said, "I'm not going to sit out." So
Right.
I'm really on both sides of it. I guess the benefit is that now we're going to be talking about the 13th and 14th ranked team playing a game, not 5 and 6, like we had with Georgia and Florida State. But I do think one of the beauties of college football, though, used to be bowl season. And I think between the opt outs and the dumb names, it's just becoming more and more ridiculous.
I really do like the idea, and I've seen it floated by a few different people now, of limiting the bowl games to 20 or so, whatever a good number is, but those becoming preseason bowls. Players aren't going to opt out of those. You don't necessarily have to count them in your record if you don't want to, if everybody agrees to not do that. But it's a way to have a higher profile scrimmage and still allow those cities to host the bowls that are important to them. Does it get rid of the Pop-Tart Bowl or the Duke Mayo Bowl? Maybe. But it keeps the integrity of the Citrus Bowl alive, which is probably not going to be hosting a playoff game anytime soon.
Or the Peach Bowl, or
Yeah.
yeah,
And even if you're rotating through some of those for your later playoff rounds, you know that well in advance. Those bowls can choose to play at the beginning of the year. But I don't know what the benefit to anybody is, even ESPN, who makes all the commercial revenue off these things, of 5 bowls on December 16th among a bunch of teams that nobody watches outside of their alumni bases. You can't fill stadiums, you can't sell tickets.
yeah.
I just think whether you love it or hate it, that era of college football is probably dead.
Maybe what they ought to do is kind of take what you're saying and limit it to 20-25 bowls, but start them all on December 26th, where you've got that weird natural dead period where people are just hanging around the house, and now you've got this built-in audience. Because I don't start watching bowl games, and because me, I'm a Christmas movie guy, so that's what I'm watching. It's sad.
Well, we certainly should schedule college football around your Christmas movie watching, because that's very important. No,
Andy, they've made dumber decisions for dumber reasons, so I'm in for it.
I mean, I don't want to sound like a grumpy old man about it, but I don't think 6-6 should get you to a bowl.
Hey,
I
Andy,
think,
there was a 5-17 played in a bowl game this year. I don't remember
yeah,
who it was. There was a 5-17.
yeah, and that's happened a couple times over the last couple of years because they don't have enough winning teams to fill the slots, and so they go to, I think, graduation rate or something. Amongst the 5-7 teams, did you graduate the most players? Because we care about academics now. We didn't care about it.
Athletes.
Yeah. Why didn't they use graduation rate to qualify Georgia or FSU for the playoff or for the?
Or why didn't they put us in the? That should have been the tiebreaker in 2008.
Yeah, I mean, I know you would have beat Tech.
Pretty sure we would have beat OU too, buddy. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So I mean, I just hate to be a grumpy old man about it, but it's just be 5 or 7 at least. Limit the bowls to top 20, 25, whatever the right number is, because we're at what 48 bowls or something like that.
Yeah.
And you just don't have enough teams who need to be playing in bowl games, and get rid of the stupid practice rule. I think that's the other good benefit about moving bowl games to the preseason is that you're practicing anyway.
Yeah.
So there is no advantage given to teams that win that the teams that didn't win need more.
I actually love that idea of sort of taking a handful of bowls and saying, this is essentially a preseason game. It doesn't count against your record. It's an exhibition. Let's go have teams that would normally play the Peach Bowl now.
And I can guarantee you, if my school wins one of these preseason bowls, we will count it in our record, whether it's official or not. We might unfurl a banner because we do that.
Well, no, I think if you win the Peach Bowl, whether it's not, you're still winning the bowl.
Mac Brown will get a ring made
because it's a real neat deal. One of the things I want to close with, and I know that Texas, I know the story of Texas. I don't follow A&M's recruiting as much, obviously, but we have had generational quarterback after generational quarterback leave the state of Texas to play for other schools. I know that Texas famously just ignored Drew Brees, right? Like, I know all of that stuff, but why does it seem like both schools have been so quarterback deficient? Like, you've had Manziel,
and
then Vince before that, and Colt, I guess, and then who else? We're not
Tannehill.
seeing. But I still don't think he was generational. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't going to go take over it. He wasn't the Vince Young or the Johnny Manziel. There were definitely levels, in my opinion.
No, but of the 3 other quarterbacks you mentioned, he had the best NFL career, and I don't know another way to measure that unless you're just looking at college resumes. I think there's a couple things that happen. The coaches in the state of Texas were reluctant to move to a spread offense, and you talk about Drew Brees when he went to Purdue, sorry, they weren't reluctant to do that, and so he got to showcase his talent. He was actually signed with A&M, and then we fired our offensive coordinator, so he went somewhere else. You guys ignored him. There was a whole list.
He lobbied and completely ignored him.
Yeah, there was a whole list that went on for a while about all the quarterbacks who left Texas that Mac Brown wanted to play safety or didn't want to recruit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's a happenstance based on the coaches that you had in state that ran the power programs. RC Slocum, yeah, he would have signed a great quarterback if he wants, but his offensive philosophy was still, I'm going to run the ball as hard as I can. And that was really du jour in college football, in Texas up until the mid 90s.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I
I
mean,
mean,
it's Troy Aikman.
that was a big dig on Greg Davis, right? You have all these wide receiver weapons and you're still only running two or three out in a play. Why aren't you spreading it out? And how many
Half of them are running screens. So
and how many Texas fans would have taken Greg Davis back in a heartbeat up until Sark was hired?
oh, I mean, all of us, all of us. No, I guess you're right. It's emblematic. It's the Troy Aikman OU experiment where they hired this guy with an amazing arm and made him run the option, and then he went
Yeah.
to UCLA and became that guy. Well, I mean, I know we have a couple episodes left. It's been a great football season. I think I can't wait to get back to it. I know, like I said, we're going to be talking some recruiting and some other changes, and we'll do pop up episodes as it seems appropriate. We're not going to try to cover basketball like last year. That was rough.
I don't think we're going to fire any more coaches, football coaches. So we should be quiet for a while.
Be quiet for a while. We'll be quiet-ish for a while. We'll see you back here soon. I'm James Christopher. This is Andy Tom Chesson. Thanks for jumping in and watching a little Lone Star Yell fight.